How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Monday, Yom Sheni. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Monday? Sharon in New Jersey, Shandor in the Bronx, Nancy in North Carolina, Melissa in Great Neck, Paul in Chicago, Joe in the Inland Empire, Bella in Florida, Jonathan in Thousand Oaks, Bill in mid-Missouri, where I got a short day at work from home because my internet went out for several hours and then it came back on for class. Those are positive gremlins, Bill. Belle in Texas, Ryan, Shavuos is around the corner. Thank God. Yes, Shavuos begins Thursday night. So we got to think about that. First of all, I think Thursday, probably at noon, we'll do our annual reading of the Book of Ruth that we do on Shavuos. Or not, because maybe we need to have our class at noon. I'll talk about this with Nina. Then definitely no class on Friday. Saturday will come out of Shabbos and Shavuos together. So let's see if we can just only miss one class. So probably we'll have a class on Thursday at noon. And maybe, I'm not sure about the Book of Ruth. I'll talk with her about that. Joseph in Massachusetts, Anita in Key West, and Ella says shalom, Marjorie in Georgia, Marie in Freeport. Welcome everybody. We are on Daf Daled, page 4 here in Tractate Gittin, the 19th volume of the Talmud. These are the laws of divorce, specifically the bill of divorce. And here in chapter 1, Mishna 1, we've been discussing what happens if a husband who's overseas sends the get, the bill of divorce, via an agent from overseas to the land of Israel where his wife is. And the sages decreed that in that situation, the agent has to truthfully declare, that the get was written in his presence and was signed in his presence, or he's not going to be qualified to deliver it. Now, the get was written and signed in the presence of two witnesses, and the agent is going to deliver that get to the wife in the presence of at least two witnesses, possibly three, according to one opinion. And Rabbah and Rava have been debating what was the motivation of the rabbis to issue this decree that the agent has to declare it was written in my presence and signed in my presence. Rava, with a V, says that the reason they decreed this is because the scribes overseas, where the husband had this get written, might not be familiar with the law that for a Jewish bill of divorce, it has to be written specifically for this husband and this wife. They can't use a get that was written for some other people who had the same name, or that was written for educational purposes. Rabbah, with two B's, Rabbah, disagrees with Rava and says that the reason this sages decreed that the agent must be able to attest it was written and signed, right, in front of witnesses in my presence, is because the witnesses who were there when the husband wrote the get won't be available here in the land of Israel where the get is being delivered to the wife. And therefore, if the get is challenged, those witnesses are not available to ratify the signatures that they sign when the get was written. All right, we continue our discussion on page 4a near the top. Rav Ashi said, in accordance with whose opinion is this Mishnah? It is in accordance with the third opinion, that of Rabbi Yehuda. So as we learned in a Mishnah, as we will learn on page 21b, Rabbi Yehuda invalidates, right, says it's not valid, a bill of divorce unless its writing and signing are performed on an item that is detached from the ground. Like you'd think, like obviously the bill of divorce is written on a piece of paper, but not necessarily. It could be written on something else. What it can't be written on is on a living plant. Now, they said elsewhere that you could write it on the plant and then detach the leaf that you wrote it on. and now it becomes valid. But from this, you see, it doesn't have to be written on paper. It just has to be written on some kind of a substance that you can write on, to the exclusion of a leaf that is still attached to a tree. Right, so that's what Rabbi Elazar said. Where was it? I'm sorry, that's what Rabbi Yehuda, he invalidates unless both the writing and the signing were performed on an item that is detached. According to this opinion, both the writing and the signing must be done for her sake, right? It's like, I thought we were talking about that, what it's written on. But it's a given for Rabbi Yehuda that the writing and the signing were done for this particular wife of this particular husband. Now the Gemara asks, and initially, what is the reason we did not establish the Mishnah in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda? Since Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is explicitly stated in a Mishnah, isn't it obvious that this Mishnah also follows his ruling? And the Gemara answers, we seek to explain the Mishnah in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Right? Generally, most Mishnahs that are written without attribution, right? Anonymous Mishnahs, which are actually the most authoritative Mishnahs, were formulated by Rabbi Meir. So we seek to explain the Mishnah in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir, as there is a general principle that a ruling in an unattributed Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir. So likewise, so if it's unattributed, we'd like it to be consistent with Rabbi Meir's opinions elsewhere. So likewise, we seek to interpret the Mishnah in accordance with the ruling of Rabbi Elazar, as we maintain in general that the law is in accordance with his opinion with regard to bills of divorce. Rabbi Elazar was an expert in the law of the get. So for these reasons, the Gemara first attempted to interpret the Mishnah in accordance with the opinion of one of these Tanaim, either Rabbi Meir, who's generally authoritative, or Rabbi Elazar, who's authoritative in the field of the get, rather than Rabbi Yehuda. Now, the Gemara continues to explain the Mishnah, our Mishnah number 1, in light of the dispute between Rabbah and Rava. Right? Rava said the scribes abroad are not familiar with the law that it has to be written for a particular wife, and Rabbah said that the witnesses won't be available. And these are the two different motivations that are being attributed to the sages when they ruled that the agent has to say, it was signed in my presence, it was written in my presence, it was signed in my presence. Okay, so we learned in the Mishnah that Rabbi Gamliel says, even one who brings a bill of divorce from Rechem or from Cheger must say it was written in my presence and it was signed in my presence. Right? We said that this is when an agent brings a get from abroad, right? So from outside the land of Israel. Well, what if the land abroad is just a border town, like right over the border, right? It's super close to Israel. It would be closer to enter Israel from one of these border towns than to get from one part of Israel to another part of Israel. So we learned in the Mishnah that Rabbi Gamliel says, even one who brings a bill of divorce from these nearby cities of Rechem or Cheger must say, it was written in my presence and it was signed in my presence. Rabbi Eliezer says, even one who brings a bill of divorce from the village of Ludim to Lod. And Abaye said, in explanation of this matter, we are dealing with towns that are not part of the land itself, but are near Eretz Yisrael, near the land of Israel, and within the boundary of Eretz Yisrael. So I'm not sure what they're talking about, but like maybe it's sort of a land that is sort of surrounded by Israel, but itself is not part of Israel. And Rabbah Bar Chana said, I myself saw that place, i.e. the distance between the village of Ludim and Lod, and it was similar to the distance from Bei Kuve to Pumbedisa. Right? So these are sages who are studying and learning and teaching in Bavel, in Babylonia, where Pumbedisa is. So for them, the reference is between Bei Kuve and Pumbedisa, but the point is that these are very close. The person who's coming from that town, from Ludim to Lod, traveling a very short distance, but entering Israel. So the Gemara analyzes the Mishnah. So one can derive by inference that the first Tan of the Mishnah holds that in these places the agent is not required to testify that the bill of divorce was written and signed for the woman's sake. And what? Is it not the case that they disagree with regard to this principle? As one sage, the first Tana, Okay. And one sage, the first Tana, holds that the reason for saying it was written in my presence and it was signed in my presence is because people living overseas are not experts in writing a bill of divorce for her sake, and the residents of these places are learned in this matter, as they are near Israel, right? It said, okay, people overseas don't know that we have this law over here, but the people, in the town right across the border, right? It's almost like in Tijuana, they know that in San Diego they have such a law, right? That idea. It's another country, but very nearby, so they're familiar with the customs of the town across the border. Where am I? As they are near to the land of Israel. And the other sage, Rabban Gamliel, holds the reason is because there are no witnesses available to ratify it, and the residents of these places are also not frequently available, as they live on the other side of the border, and it is difficult to bring witnesses from one place to another. Right, so you can get that feeling like you might have thought, in ancient times they didn't have border walls and armed guards and what do you call that big gate, that swings up and swings down, and that picture that we have in our mind, like imagine during the Cold War, that border as you enter the Soviet Union, it's almost like entering a prison. But in ancient times, they just had wide open spaces and it must have been easy to cross a border. But no, of course not. They had countries, they had nations, they had, the king of that country and the king of this country. And if you're going from one nation to another, they're going to have soldiers, and it's not so easy to cross the border. But the Gemara rejects this suggestion, right? So you might have thought that even with a border town, both of these motivations, right, both of these reasons would apply why you would need this agent to make the declaration. Both because on the other side of the border, they don't know the laws that we have here, and because on the other side of the border, it's not so easy to get the witnesses to come across and ratify the document. But the Gemara rejects this. No, there is no proof that the issue is a dispute among these earlier sages, the Tanaim, as Rabbah, Rabbah, who holds that the reason the sages decree, it's hard to keep track, Rabbah and Rabbah, which believes what? So I have to keep referring to my little note, right? Rabbah says because the witnesses are not available. So Rabbah would resolve the differences with regard to this border town according to his own line of reasoning. And Rabbah would resolve them according to his line of reasoning. And the Gemara explains. Rabbah resolves them according to his line of reasoning, as everyone agrees that the reason is because they are not experts in writing a bill of divorce for her sake. And here they disagree with regard to this issue. The first Tana holds that since the residents of these cities are located near Israel, they are assumed to be learned in this law. And Rabban Gamliel came to say, granted, the residents of these cities that are within the boundary of Eretz Yisrael, they are learned in the law. However, the residents of these cities that are only near the land of Israel are not learned. And Rabbi Eliezer came to say, when he mentioned the villages of Ludim and the village of Ludim and the town of Lod, that the residents of those cities are within the boundary of the land of Israel, but they are also not treated as learned, so that you could not make a distinction within separate areas of the country overseas. In other words, anywhere that is not part of the Jewish settlement of the land of Israel is classified as outside, even if they are familiar with the laws of the Bill of Divorce. So what we're talking about, there was the land of Israel that was defined when Joshua led the children of Israel out of the wilderness into the land of Israel. There was the period of conquest, and they settled the borders of the land of Israel. If we're talking about much later, Second Temple period, post-Second Temple period, the time of the Tanaim ends about the year 200 of the Common Era. So there's 130 years after the temple was destroyed. All of this time under Roman rule. So for sure, not what we call the land of Israel was fully settled by Jews, and there were completely Gentile cities in that area, right? So they're in the land of Israel, but who's to say that they are learned in that city, that a get must be written for the woman, for that particular woman. And also, who's to say that the witnesses in that city are going to be available to come into a city that is within the Jewish settlement, within the land of Israel in that period in history? Likewise, Rava resolves the various opinions in the Mishnah according to his line of reasoning. He maintains that everyone agrees that the reason for the declaration, it was written in my presence and it was signed in my presence, is because there are no witnesses available to ratify it. And the first Tana holds, since the residents of these cities are nearby, they are frequently available. And Rabban Gamliel came to say the residents of cities within the boundary of the land of Israel are frequently available. However, the residents of places that are merely near the land of Israel are not frequently available. And Rabbi Eliezer came to say that the residents of those cities that are within the boundary of Eretz Yisrael are also not considered to be like the land of Israel in this matter, despite their proximity to the Jewish settlement, since they're outside the Jewish settlement, even though they're in the land of Israel. So that you should not make a distinction within separate areas of a country overseas, right? So they're going to extend their thinking to say, oh, well, what if an agent went from one town to another town, both outside of Israel? Are we going to require the agent to make that declaration in that situation? If our reasoning is that they're not learned in the law that the get has to be written for the woman's sake, then we should require the agent to make that declaration. If we're going to say that the reason the sages made that declaration is because the witnesses are not frequently available, well, if they're, near each other and both outside of Israel, then that should not apply. Now, we learned in the Mishnah, and the rabbis say that one is required to say, it was written in my presence and it was signed in my presence, only if he brings a bill of divorce from a country overseas to Eretz Yisrael. And the same applies to one who delivers a bill of divorce from Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, to a country overseas. Now the Gemara analyzes this statement. One can learn by inference that the first Tana of the Mishnah holds that one who delivers a bill of divorce from Eretz Yisrael to a country overseas is not required to say this declaration. And what? Is it not the case that they disagree with regard to this principle? As one sage, the first Tana, holds that the reason for the declaration is because they are not experts in writing a bill of divorce for her sake. And these people inside the Jewish settlement in the land of Israel certainly are familiar with that law. So why would we require the agent to make that declaration if the reasoning of the sages was that the people where the get is being written are not familiar with that law? If now the get is originating with a husband in the land of Israel and being sent to a wife outside of Israel, there would be no need for him to make that declaration. So it must be that the reasoning of the sages was that the witnesses won't be available to ratify it, and therefore we have this extra safeguard that the agent who delivers the get must be able to state it was written in my presence and it was signed in my presence. Right? So that's according to the one who says that in that case. And one sage, the rabbis who disagree, hold that the reason for the testimony is because there are no witnesses available to ratify it, and these witnesses who travel from Eretz Yisrael overseas are also not frequently available. But the Gemara rejects this explanation, and now we're on 4b. One cannot prove that this issue is a dispute of the Tanaim, as Rabbah resolves the different opinions in the Mishnah according to his line of reasoning, and Rabbah resolves them according to his line of reasoning. Rabbah resolves them according to his line of reasoning like this. It may be that everyone agrees that the reason is because they are not experts in writing a bill of divorce for her sake, and here they disagree with regard to a decree applied in the case of one who delivers a bill of divorce to Eretz Yisrael due to the concern that it will be confused with the case of one who brings a bill of divorce from Eretz Yisrael. Right? So Rabbah's not giving up so quick. You could say that, if the reason was that if the reason for the sages issuing this decree that the agent must be able to say was written in my presence and it was signed in my presence is because people outside the land of Israel are not familiar with the law, that it was written for, it must be written for, that get must be written for her sake, that particular woman, then that wouldn't apply for a get originating in Eretz Yisrael and going out of Eretz Yisrael. But Rabbah says, no, that is the reason. And the reason why the sages further decreed that we still maintain that requirement for a get that originates in the land of Israel and goes outside of Israel is because we don't want people confused that the agent is only required in one direction and not the other. So they might have thought, oh, maybe they did away with the requirement of the agent to make this declaration, because I saw that an agent brought a bill of divorce across the border and he didn't have to make that declaration, and not realizing it was because of the direction that the border was crossed from Israel to the outside. And this person might mistakenly think that there's no requirement to make that declaration when you cross a border in the other direction. Lest people make that mistake, the sages made it a simple rule. You cross the border, you're going to have to make the declaration. This is what Rabbah says. I'm sorry, that's what Rabbah says. That's Rabbah. That's Rabbah. Okay. And the Gemara explains that the first Tana holds the sages do not decree with regard to one who delivers due to one who brings. Right? So the Tana is disagreeing with this idea. No, we're not going to make it the same requirement in both directions because people might get confused. People are not such simpletons, and the law can be a little bit more sophisticated than that. And if the reason for the agent to make the declaration is because they're not familiar with the law outside of Israel, we're not going to therefore also require the agent make that declaration in the reverse direction when there's no reason to do that. And the later rabbis hold that the sages do decree with regard to one who delivers due to one who brings. And the reason for this decree is that one might make a mistake and think that just as an agent who delivers a bill of divorce from Eretz Yisrael to a country overseas is not required to testify that it was written and signed in his presence, so too, one who brings a bill of divorce from a country overseas to Eretz Yisrael need not state this declaration. Because people might make that mistake, consequently, the sages decreed that even one who delivers a bill of divorce from Eretz Yisrael to a country overseas must make the declaration. And Rava also resolves the different opinions in the Mishnah according to his own line of reasoning. And how so? He maintains that everyone agrees that the reason for the declaration, it was written in my presence and it was signed in my presence, is because there are no witnesses available to ratify the signatures. And the later rabbis do not disagree with the previous opinion. Rather, they come to explain the reasoning of the first Tana. In other words, the first Tana agrees that one who takes a bill of divorce from Eretz Yisrael to a country overseas must make the declaration, and he simply taught the law in a concise manner. Now, the Gemara attempts to cite a different proof. We learned in the Mishnah, one who brings a bill of divorce from one region to another region within a country overseas must also say it was written in my presence and it was signed in my presence. And the Gemara infers, but if he brought a bill of divorce within one region in a country overseas, he is not required, right? From one region to another region, both overseas, he makes the declaration. So therefore, if he's bringing the bill of divorce within a region, not from one region to another, but, like let's say within the same city or from one city to another city, but in the same region, both overseas, so maybe then the declaration is not required. Now, this works out well according to the opinion of Rava, as witnesses are available in the same region. However, according to the opinion of Rabbah, the matter is difficult, as overseas residents are not experts in the law, and therefore it does not matter how closely they are located to each other. Gemara answers, according to the opinion of Rabbah, do not say that the correct inference is within one region in a country overseas, he is not required to state the declaration. Rather, say that the inference from this requirement that from one region to another region overseas we make the declaration, from this we infer that from region to region within the land of Israel, he is not required to make the declaration. The Gemara raises a difficulty with regard to this answer. And by the way, now this is really sharpening the thinking, right? If you've stated a law that when you go from one city to another city outside the country, you have to make this declaration and nothing else is said, what are we to infer from that? Are we to infer that if you stay within the same city outside the country, the law doesn't apply? Or are we going to infer that if you go from city to city, both within the land of Israel, the declaration is not stated. Now, both of these inferences, have logic to them, and perhaps both are true, but they're not both necessarily true. That's why you would need more information, right? So the Gemara raises a difficulty with regard to this line of reasoning. But that law need not be derived by inference, right? That you don't need to make the declaration if the get travels from one city to another within the land of Israel. We don't have to derive that by inference because that Mishnah is teaching it because the Mishnah teaches it explicitly. One who brings a bill of divorce from one place to another within the land of Israel is not required to say it was written in my presence and it was signed in my presence. If this law were to be derived from that statement alone, I would say this applies only after the fact, i.e., if someone acted in this manner, then the bill of divorce is not invalidated. However, it might have been thought that one should not act in this manner ab initio. Rather, the agent should state the declaration. Therefore, the Mishnah teaches us by means of this inference from its first section that he need not state the declaration even ab initio. Now, what's so good about following this logic, and it's challenging, it's not easy, but they're really teaching us to read between the lines, right? According to what is said, what do we know about what is not being said? What can we take to be true about conditions that are not listed, about situations that are not listed, from what we've learned about the situations that are listed? And we have to be very careful because what sounds logical might not be right. So the Gemara offers an alternative version of this discussion. And some raise the objection like this. By inferring differently from that ruling of the Mishnah, like this. The Mishnah teaches, one who brings a bill of divorce from one region to another region within a country overseas must also say, it was written in my presence and it was signed in my presence. And the Gemara infers from here that if he brings the document from region to region within the land of Israel, he is not required to state the declaration. Now, this works out well according to the opinion of Rabbah, as the residents of Eretz Yisrael are aware of the law that a bill of divorce must be written for the woman's sake. However, it is difficult according to the opinion of Rabbah. And the Gemara rejects this inference, right? So Rabbah says that the witnesses are frequently not available, right? Rabbah says... Right, Rabbah says the witnesses are frequently not available. Rabbah says it's because, I want to make sure I'm following. Rabbah says because the scribes are not expert. Rabbah says because the witnesses are not available. So if you're going from region to region within the land of Israel, you still have the problem that the witnesses are not available, but you don't have the problem that the scribes in one or the other region are not aware that the law is that the get has to be written for her sake. They are aware of that. So if you don't make the requirement of the declaration when you go from city to city, from region to region within the land of Israel, that would seem to prove that the concern of the sages was that the witnesses are not available, per Rabbah, rather than Rabbah's attribution that the sages were concerned that the people wouldn't know the law. Right? So if you don't require the declaration, when they travel from when the agent travels from region to region within Israel, this is difficult according to the opinion of Rabbah. You would think. But the Gemara rejects this inference. No, you can't jump to that. Do not say that the Mishnah is teaching that from one region to another region within Eretz Yisrael he is not required. Rather, say within one region in a country overseas he is not. Rather, instead of when it says you do have the requirement when the agent goes from one region to another region overseas, what do we infer from that? That if it's within a single region overseas, then the declaration is not necessary. And that would argue that the sages made the declaration because witnesses are not available, and here the witnesses are available, so you don't need the declaration. But on the other hand, if the reason they made the declaration is because the scribes overseas are not familiar with the law that it must be written for her sake, then it wouldn't matter that you're sending the get within a single region overseas. I want to make sure I'm in the right place. And the Gemara questions this interpretation. However, if that is so with regard to an agent who brings a bill of divorce from region to region within Eretz Yisrael, then what is the law? Is he required to state the declaration? If so, let the Mishnah teach simply, one who brings a bill of divorce from one region to another region must state the declaration, and it doesn't matter whether you're crossing a border or not. And the Gemara answers, actually, one who brings from region to region within Eretz Yisrael is also not required to state the declaration, even according to the opinion of Rava, for the following reason. Since there are those who ascend to Jerusalem for the pilgrimage festival, witnesses are frequently available, and they can come even from one region to another. The population of Israel frequently travels because people go up to Jerusalem. They're accustomed to make journeys. So you don't have to worry, even going from one region to another region within the land of Israel, that witnesses won't be available. They will be available. So we don't really know what the reasoning of the sages is, because both conditions are done away with if the get is going from one region to another region within the land of Israel. The scribes know the law, that it must be written for her sake, and witnesses are available. So we haven't learned yet what was the reason the sages required that declaration when the get comes in from overseas. Now, the Gemara raises a difficulty, yet another difficulty, with this idea that witnesses are available within the land of Israel. Now, this works out well when the temple is standing, as there are those who ascend to Jerusalem for the pilgrimage festival at that time. However, when the temple is not standing, right, and the sages of the Gemara are writing hundreds of years after the second temple was destroyed, however, when the temple is not standing, then what can be said? And the Gemara answers, since there are central courts that are fixed in a permanent location where everyone goes, witnesses are frequently available to ratify the bill of divorce. So that would seem to argue that even when the temple is not standing, it's the same idea. Within Israel, people travel. Within Israel, people know the law. So that's why the declaration is not necessary. And we haven't learned why the sages made the declaration about get that's coming in from overseas to Israel. Was it because the witnesses are not available, or because the foreign scribes don't know the law? So the Gemara suggests another proof. We learned in the Mishnah that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says that even an agent who brings a bill of divorce from one district to another district must say that it was written and signed in his presence. And Rabbi Yitzchak said there was one city in Eretz Yisrael, and Asisiyot was its name, and it contained two districts that divided the city. And its two governors were so particular with each other that they enacted travel restrictions that made it impossible to cross through the city. And consequently, they were required to say the declaration when bringing a get, even from one side of the city to the other side of the city. So the Gemara comments, okay, this works out well according to the opinion of Rava, who holds that the reason is due to unavailability of witnesses. But it would be difficult according to Rava, who maintains that there is no need to state the declaration in Israel because its residents are aware of the law that a bill of divorce must be written for the woman's sake. And the Gemara answers, Rava is of the opinion that the reason is also in accordance with the opinion of Rava, i.e. Rava agrees that one of the reasons for this law is because witnesses are not available to ratify the bill of divorce. He simply adds a second reason, that they are not experts in the law of writing the document for her sake. Okay. So now we've redefined the dispute, the debate between Rabba and Rava. We thought it was that Rabba says, back to my cheat sheet. that Rabbah says the reason the sages decreed the declaration is required is because witnesses are not available, and Rava said the reason is because scribes are not expert. But now we're saying no. They both agree that the foreign scribes are not expert, but Rabbah says an additional reason the sages made that decree is because the witnesses would not be available. So the Gemara, okay. And the Gemara answers, wait a minute. Yes, okay. So the Gemara asks, okay, so what then is the difference between them? I.e., between Rava's explanation and that of Rabbah, right? It's not just that Rabbah adds an additional reason. What's going to be the practical significance between them? So there is a difference between them with regard to a case where two people bring the bill of divorce from a country overseas. According to the opinion of Rabbah, they do not need to say it was written in my presence and it was signed in my presence, as additional witnesses are not needed to confirm this bill of divorce, because they are the witnesses. However, it is still necessary to declare that the document was written for the sake of the wife. Alternatively, and now I'm almost done. If you've got a question or comment, get it in now. Alternatively, the difference between the two explanations involves a case where one agent brought the bill of divorce from one place to another within a single region, in a country overseas, where witnesses are available to ratify it. So according to Rabbah, it is still necessary for the agent to utter the declaration so that he can confirm that the bill of divorce was written for her sake. According to Rabbah, he does not have to say it was written in my presence and it was signed in my presence, because witnesses are readily available if needed. I think that the key takeaway from this discussion is difficult, it's challenging. I did the best that I could to make it clear, and I know that I slipped up a couple of times. But the bottom line, I think that we got to really take this away, particularly, first of all, really what they're telling you is you need a lawyer. You're going to get into a contract, any kind of a contract, marriage contract, divorce contract, business contract, purchase contract, sale contract, lease on a car, on a house. What seems to be the plain English is not. It's jargon, right? And because if you are untrained, are reading that, you're gonna miss the inferences and implications of what is on the page. And if you want to help yourself, because here's the thing, even if you hire a lawyer, and hopefully you're gonna hire a good one, they're gonna do a good job, they don't care about your contract as much as you do. So when you read it, you have to resist the human urge to kind of go on autopilot, and just as you read this like complex legalese and you're just like falling asleep after the first three words, you got to resist that urge. You got to read it carefully, and after each sentence, ask yourself, what was just said to me? Why is this sentence in the contract? What are the implications of that sentence? Now that's the lawyer's job. But a lawyer could be careless, a lawyer could be in a hurry, a lawyer could miss something, right? And so, learning how to read what is implied, that's in the whole world of contracts and legal jargon, but it's also going to be in many other things, like when you read a newspaper, what is really behind the story that you're reading? Why was that sentence included? Why was a different sentence not included? What can we assume from this? And what would it be a mistake to assume, right? Catch yourself making assumptions and say, wait a minute, what is that assumption based on, right? They're really teaching you how to read and how to argue. It's a wonderful example, right? As we analyze two analyses, right? Rava and Rabbah were analyzing why the sages created that requirement that the agent make that declaration, and they were finding two different motivations, right? We see this all the time in modern jurisprudence in America, where we ask ourselves, what was the founders' intent when they wrote the Constitution? What was a legislator's intent for federal law or a state law? What were they intending? The judge has to ask that question when a novel case comes up that asks him to apply that law. right? And, the more you train yourself and are able to understand what's being said, what's not being said, why was it said, why was the omission done that way, etc., the sharper the brain is going to get. And it's like you're creating armor for yourself, right? You're going to be a more protected person if you can develop the ability to read and reason as the sages are teaching us here. All right, let's see if we got a couple questions and comments. Bill, so when we say that the get must be written for her sake, does that permit or exclude, let us say, get templates, such as follows? A certain scribe writes up a get, but with no names, only blank spaces where the names may go. He then fills in the names when the husband comes in to ask him to write up the get. Is this acceptable, or was the get now written for the sake of another, as it were? Now, that's a great question, and I dare not answer it, because I'm sure we're going to come to this question later in the tractate, and it's a wonderful question, right? So for sure what we know is that if a get was written with the same names as the husband and the wife who's going to receive it, and the same, like Bill Johnson of Carson City is divorcing Susan Johnson of Carson City. I'm just making these names up. Right? So, and the original Bill and Susan Johnson decided to stay together, but this other Bill and Susan Johnson said, oh, well, you know what? Let's save some money. We can use their divorce document. No, we know they can't do that. If the first one was written as a teaching example to be taught in a law school, and they happen to use the names, right? Maybe the professor used his own names just for the teaching example, and then later decided to divorce his own wife. No, it wasn't written, even though it was written with his names, but it was written as a teaching example. But where the words were just left on the page and the names were not filled in, and later the names were filled in, so you can say that this document was finished for this particular husband and that particular wife. So you could make the argument that it would work, but I'm not sure. If we've learned nothing else today, we know that we can't jump to that assumption. And so on that particular question, we're going to wait and see. Sharon, I noticed that for her own sake is called lishma. Is that comparable to studying Torah lishma, studying Torah for its own sake? Yes, exactly. Lishma, right? For that, it's also lishma. What does that really mean? For the hearer or for the name, right? And so in this case, it's being translated that way, and it means that way, right? And so what Sharon is referencing is that what we want to aspire to, is to study Torah lishma, right? Not because we want to learn Torah, let's say, so that I can, get paid to teach it, or so that, I'll know what the law of contracts is when I'm about to buy a house, in a country that follows Jewish law as its main law, but rather that, every day I want to learn some Torah because God commanded me to learn Torah, and I'm doing it just to fulfill God's commandment. That's Torah lishma, right, for its own sake. And here it's the same meaning, right? That get was written for its own sake, meaning these two people. Joseph, why were those outside of Judea, even within Israel, considered ignoramus, particularly Galilee, if I'm getting this correct? I think simply we're saying that in a later period in history, where the Romans, and other peoples had now settled in the land of Israel. I mean, recall that when Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the first temple, he took all the Jews out of Israel. Now, he didn't leave a ghost town. He brought other parts of his population into the land of Israel. And the Samaritans, right, were a group that at some point that were, resettled in the land of Israel. And because they were not Jews, like lions started attacking them. And they said, oh, well, I guess we need to become Jewish. But they didn't really want to be Jewish. And so they were not wholehearted in their conversion. Especially during Roman times, the Romans also, this has traditionally throughout history been a way of wielding power. Think of the Soviet Union. Think of China, right? A way of wielding power over your population is, rather than let groups that have historically, sort of bonded together and are going to resent, this new government imposing its will on them. So you split those people up, send them to different parts of your empire, and it's going to help you consolidate power if you're a tyrant, right? And so the Romans brought other people into the land of Israel, so they were living in Eretz Yisrael, but they were definitely not cognizant of Jewish law, so that they would know, for example, that a get has to be written for her own sake. Joe, writing a get is for the sake of the wife. Is this a way of showing some respect for her in the marriage? Otherwise, a simple form could be used, but it can't be specific to these people and this marriage and any points that need to be addressed. I would say yes. I would agree with you. And it's definitely a heavy thing, right? This is for sure the opposite of the ideal situation. We're all saddened when a marriage ends. We have a tradition that, that God spends a significant amount of God's time, arranging marriages. And for one reason or another, it didn't work out. It didn't work out. Maybe the people who were destined to be together didn't end up together because they jumped the gun and married somebody propitiously, or they missed the cue, or something like that happened. But for the most part, we want to believe that people who get married were fated to be together. And when it ends, it's tragic, it's sad. However, the Torah, right, acknowledges that marriages will end. The law of the get is from the written Torah, right, originally given at Mount Sinai. So we know that marriages end. It's just not something we enter into lightly. And then, as Nina said, the reason the Talmud teaches the law of the get before the law of the Kiddushin, right, the marriage contract, is so that we see, when we get into a marriage, let's make sure we share values, we know what we're about, we're going into this with open eyes, we want to make it work, so we don't end up in the get situation, because that's difficult for all parties. Especially in this patriarchal society, it's tougher on the woman. She's going to be paid, if the husband divorces her, he owes her the value of the ketubah, right? Of the ketubah. I mean, that he's going to owe her the price of the marriage contract that we learned in ketubos. But kiddushin is sort of, has other aspects of the law of the marriage besides just writing the ketubah and what's owed under the ketubah. Okay. Enough of me rambling. That's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we're going to be together again tomorrow night, Tuesday, regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific, for Daf Hey, page 5. Have a great night.